Hey folks, this is Seth again from the Lohman Planetarium. I'm the Curator of Astronomy, and I'm back with you for another weekly update of our sky tonight. Thanks for joining and tuning in. So let's get right to it. For this week, we're covering May 18th through May 24th. There's a lot of great things to see in the sky right now, so let's get right to it. And as usual, we're using this wonderful program called Stellarium as we look in this three-dimensional view of our sky. You'll notice down here, here's the horizon, and our cardinal points, there's the south, southwest, and the west right there. So we have the sun that we will set, and this week the sun sets kind of in the 8:10 time frame or so. So let's continue on. We'll speed up time. For those who are not familiar with Stellarium, you'll notice a time and date here. You'll see some information down here and at the top left. So we'll set the sun, and we still have a great view of this bright object just above the western horizon. You'll notice right here where I'm circling with my mouse, that is the planet Venus. I've talked about it quite a bit in the last month or two, so we can still see it in the west. It is getting kind of lower in the sky, but there is an opportunity to see the brightest planet visible from Earth, and it is really, really bright. This sort of non-twinkling object in the sky, since planets don't really twinkle like the stars do. So we are speeding through the evening and into the nighttime so we can see the stars and what are visible in the sky. And there's quite a lot to see here, pretty far into the spring now. And at this time of year, as we kind of shift our attention more to the top of the sky, what we call the zenith, that's where we'll find many of those spring stars I've mentioned previous. And for the spring, I usually start with this sort of hook shape, which forms the head and the body here that you can see there. And then there's the tail of Leo the lion. This, of course, is a constellation, a picture made by the stars. And we can click on the brightest star in Leo. Here's this called Regulus, which means little king. And we can turn on the outline and the picture of them. And for those who don't know, there are a lot of constellations in the sky. In total, there are 88 constellations that are agreed upon. And so these 88 for the north and southern hemisphere divide the sky up into different sections. Some of these go back to ancient Greek mythology. So Leo is one of them. And in the spring sky, there are a few other constellations that are notable. So Leo is probably the best at this time of the year. But if we look below Leo, you'll see this kind of long string of stars that kind of meander below it. They're not as bright as Leo's stars, but they're still pretty noticeable if you look carefully. And so this is a little bit lower to the south. And I didn't tell you, this is just after 9 o'clock. So you see 2113 here. And there is this very long sea snake called Hydra, the sea serpent. And this is that creature you cut off a head and two more sprout back. You may have seen that in movies or in books or mythologies. And so Hydra's pretty famous. And in this area, we have some of the constellations that are a little smaller, like down here where my mouse is. This is right here called Corvus the Crow that you find there. Not far from that is Crater the Cup. Of course, these are not as well known of constellations, but they're significant for this time of year. And you see this bright star here, a little bit more to the southeast. That is the star called Spica, which is a pretty bright star, part of Virgo the Maiden. So these are great spring stars. And actually in our Lohman Planetarium lobby, we have a big star chart, a star map, the first ancient star map that we got in our collection some years ago. And it's really big, and it's part of an atlas that was put together by someone named John Flamsteed, the first royal astronomer for England. But anyway, he was really good at charting the skies. And one of the pages of his atlas is a page that we have of this part of the sky, featuring Hydra, Corvus the Crow, Crater the Cup, Virgo, and Leo the Lion. So it's an area of the sky I quite enjoy, especially since we have a little bit of historical connection to it in the Lohman Planetarium lobby. It's kind of nice. All right, so that's pretty nice, pretty high in the sky, a little bit to the south, and you have a good part of the night to see those still. Now, if we kind of move over to the east, sort of in this area right, kind of in here, we still can see here Arcturus, this really bright star, is part of something called Boötes, the herdsman. Now, what I really kind of want to focus on a little bit in this presentation is a little bit below Boötes and Arcturus, which Arcturus is a very bright star for the spring, more to the northeast. This may be a little challenging to find, but we're going to try to make things a little more difficult. So, to really see what people can find in the sky. It's always fun to kind of challenge yourself in the sky. So if we look kind of below that, more towards the northeast, you may find some stars down here. And what you want to look out for is something called the keystone. So you notice this sort of shape here, like the keystone in an arch at the top of an arch. And so that keystone shape forms a very important part of one of the most famous constellations in our sky, known as Hercules, the hero. So you may have heard of Hercules. He's not actually very bright, kind of dim, surprisingly for a famous constellation. So this is kind of the body or part of the body of Hercules. And so if I can kind of click on one of these stars in Hercules and I can draw him, there he is. A little hard to tell there, so I can put him up. And actually the picture that we have in Stellarium is he's fighting Hydra, the sea serpent. That was one of Hercules' 12 labors. He kind of got into some trouble from Greek mythology. To make a long story very short, and to clear his name of past wrongdoings, he had to perform what are called these labors, and there are 12 of them, and he fought these big beasts like Leo and Scorpius, and one of them was Hydra, the sea snake. So that's what you see, at least in this picture that we have here. The art can change depending on who, of course, drew it or put it together, depending, on their imagination and what they thought worked in the sky. So that can really change. But definitely this is where the constellation is located in the northeast. You start to see it kind of later in the spring as the summer starts to come. Hercules is there. Again, he's not that bright, but look for the keystone shape. If I zoom a little bit, you might see that shape right here. Now, there's a really interesting object inside Hercules I like to talk about, and we're going to zoom in to it just a bit more. Now, this is something you won't really see with naked eyes. You probably need binoculars or a small telescope, but there's a little fuzzy ball right here inside Hercules. It's pretty famous, called the Great Cluster of Hercules. It's a whole bunch of stars packed really closely together in space. We're kind of zooming into it in Stellarium to give you a better view of it, and here it is. This is also known as M13, which is Messier 13. There's a whole catalog called the Messier catalog of these kind of dim objects in the sky. And Charles Messier was a French astronomer a while back who was looking for comets. That was a popular thing to do back in the day. And there's a lot of things that were mistaken for comets. So in order to make sure people weren't mistaking fuzzy objects for actual comets, Charles Messier decided to put a catalog together to distinguish those objects that are definitely not comets. And number 13 on his list is this fuzzy object here, a globular cluster, as we call it, called the Great Cluster of Hercules, or sometimes you hear Hercules cluster. And so here's the Stellarium picture. What's kind of fun is I have a picture that I took personally with one of our Lohmann Planetarium telescopes. See if we can click right to it. And here it is. And not too bad. This is just one exposure of about 141 second exposure of cluster of Hercules. And what you see here are hundreds of thousands of stars packed closely together in space. This is about 25,000 light years away, so it's pretty far away. It's about 145 light years across, at least the main part of the cluster. And globular clusters have a whole bunch of stars, and they're really old. They date back to the earliest part of our universe. And this cluster exists not in the disk of our Milky Way galaxy where most stars exist. It lies kind of above it, or you could say below it. There's no really up and down in space, but not in the very busy regions of our galaxy. And so these are some of the oldest types of objects you can find in the universe. And the Hercules cluster, or the Great Cluster in Hercules, is a good example of that you can find. Again, maybe with binoculars. This is through a telescope and a long exposure. And that has revealed to us all these stars packed closely together in space. So it's kind of neat to see it in this way. And again, this is my first attempt at this. This is not even using multiple pictures or anything, just one image with a very long exposure and tracked pretty well in the sky. And so I'm pretty happy with this picture. It kind of worked out. And so it's kind of nice. But anyway, we'll go back to our stellarium view. We'll zoom back out. So that's the Hercules cluster rising out of the kind of northeastern part of the sky inside the keystone of Hercules, the hero, as some people call it. And there he is. All right, so that's something to kind of look out for at this time of the year. Now, another part of the sky I've really been mentioning is at the morning before sunrise. So we're going to kind of skip ahead. We'll zoom out a little bit to give us a more broad view of the sky. There's a Big Dipper, by the way, right there. We're going to speed up time and go through the rest of the night into the early morning. And what I'm going to show you really is something that's nice to kind of follow along through the rest of the week. What I just kind of went through works for the whole week, of course. But what I'll show you next are things that kind of change a little bit more through the week. So we'll just kind of watch out for that. So if you do stay up late or get up early in the morning, I've already mentioned a whole bunch of planets rising in the east. This has been really awesome. You'll notice this reddish looking one here. That's Mars, the fourth planet from our sun. So you can see that there. And then not far from each other, now you can see it kind of in the east and south, southeastern part of the sky, really. We have these two planets. This is right here, Saturn, and then a little bit bigger and brighter, because it is the biggest planet in the solar system and closer to us, is Jupiter, the fifth planet from the sun. So we have Mars, Saturn, Jupiter in the morning. So if you want to go planet viewing, you got a little bit in the evening, or at least one in the evening for Venus, but a whole bunch late night or early morning sky for these three planets towards the east and southeast. So that's kind of nice. And so we'll speed up time here. And at least for Tuesday morning that we're now looking at, the 19th, you'll have the very thin crescent moon right above the eastern horizon. But one thing I really want to focus on right now is the chance of seeing a comet in the sky. Let's make sure we're looking in the right area. So here's the east, there's the northeast, and you can see a little bit of the sun's glow as you get into the 6 o'clock hour, and that's where sunrise begins to happen. But this month, we've had a chance to see a comet, and you can see a little bit of a wisp right here. It might be a little tough. So we'll zoom in into it. I can even click on it, see if it'll allow me. Here we go. So we look at the top left, it says Swan. That's the comet Swan, named after an instrument on a solar observatory called SOHO, NASA and European Space Administration observatory that studies the sun. And there is an instrument that was used by an amateur astronomer who found a comet in late March. And here's the technical name, C2020F8. This is the year it was discovered, so just this year, pretty recent. And this comet was first visible mostly in the southern hemisphere and now has made its way more into the northern hemisphere sky where we live. And fortunately for us Floridians, we have a fairly decent view before the sun's light obscures the view of this comet, which, if you're not familiar with comets, there are these icy objects, these rocky, icy, almost like an icy dirt ball is a kind of fun way to describe it. And they get bright when they get close to the sun. So its closest approach to Earth already happened last week, and now it's approaching closer to the sun. And as it does that, it should get brighter and brighter, unless it breaks up, which is a real possibility. Comets are notoriously unpredictable. They can be very fragile. And as the sun's radiation heats them up, they can outgas and spin and tumble and even break up, and may not even survive the close passage to the sun. So we'll see what happens. But there is possibly a chance to see this comet in the early morning sky towards the northeast. And so it's actually below the sort of W-shaped constellation here called Cassiopeia. Looks like a big W. And this is Perseus. So I guess you could see it's It's inside of the Perseus constellation here, the one who fell in love with actually Andromeda, the daughter of Cassiopeia. And so if we can kind of click back on the comet here and speed up or go through the rest of the week, you'll see the comet will kind of move lower in the horizon. Let's kind of scoot back in time to go a little darker, and you'll see it get a little bit lower and lower, but it is approaching the sun, and by the 25th, I believe, of this month, it will get to closest approach to the sun, and that's called perihelion, and then swing by the sun and shoot out again from there. So we'll see if it survives that. But if it does through this whole week, you might be able to see this comet even with your naked eyes without binoculars or a telescope, this kind of wispy sort of kind of glowing blob of light, you could call it. And it can have a tail. Binoculars or a telescope will reveal the tail a little bit better. But that's kind of neat to see that. So not probably the brightest comet you would see, but still neat to see one of these ancient icy objects from the outer solar system become visible in our sky. So that's something to kind of watch through the week, early in the morning before the sun rises in the 6 o'clock hour. So stay tuned for that. And we'll actually get the sun to rise here for those mornings. So I know that's kind of early to check that out, but something for morning observers or anyone that just wants to see cool stuff. Get up in the morning and take a look at that. So that is a good place to end this presentation, this update of our sky for this week. Thanks again for tuning in. Glad to have you here. Tune in again next week for another edition of our Sky Tonight. And stay tuned also, we're getting ready to cover the launch of the Crew Dragon, the first commercial crew launch. That will happen on May 27th. So there's a lot of exciting things going on, not just in astronomy, but in space flight as well. I'm definitely very, very excited. So take care, happy stargazing, and see you again for another edition of our Sky Tonight. Thanks.